We are beset by a plague of angels or devils. God grant us the wisdom to discern one from the other. From a complete history of the colony of Angel Falls. Chapter 1. Jesse. Not much longer now, Jesse's father says. His good cheer sounds forced and grates on her nerves. Looking through the windshield, she sees wipers barely clearing a semicircle before the rippling sheets of rain obscure the view. How can her father see to drive? Jessie presses her forehead against the passenger window and stares out at the incessant splash of water. Beyond that, she can only see dull gray shapes, maybe trees, thinning out, becoming shorter, and then a sudden openness that could be a field or a lake. Other gray shapes, symmetrical with lights, buildings of some kind, fading back into a jagged line which might be a forest. Now he's speaking again in the high-pitched, overcompensating tone he started using only 2 hours into the trip. Wait till you see the ocean, kitten. It's beautiful. Everywhere you go, water all around. Jessie stares at the water pouring down her window, but doesn't say anything. The trip has been one long traffic jam from New York to the far side of Boston, but it isn't boredom or irritation Jessie feels. What she feels is fear. With every wet mile they put between themselves and home, she grows convinced she's made a terrible mistake. How can you even think of taking her there? Her mother's voice was a harsh whisper that reached Jessie as she stood in the dark hallway. That girl was Jessie's age. It's not like I'm dropping her off at the edge of a forest. She'll be with me. What part of that seems so dangerous? How can you keep an eye on her if you're meeting with realtors, contractors, whatever? Are you going to keep her with you every minute? Oh, and that's what you've been doing all these years? You're just looking for an excuse to keep her? Jessie squeezes her eyes closed against the memory. Their arguing had gotten worse, especially this past month. What was Mom talking about this morning? She asks her dad now. What's that? The girl my age? Mom was freaking out about it this morning. What happened? Nothing. His answer sounds so quick and false that Jessie sputters out a laugh. Nothing, she repeats. Jessie sees his eyes flicker between the road and her face, measuring something. He goes on. There was a girl who disappeared a few weeks ago. It was on the news this morning. From here? The thought makes her shiver. Mm-hmm. She was last seen in the woods. You won't go there, of course. Nobody goes there. Of course, Jessie repeats, feeling its pull. Somebody goes there, or people wouldn't be scared of it. She looks at the wet, blurry landscape speeding by. Do they think she's dead? He makes a strange sound in his throat before answering. I don't know. You know everything I know. Jessie leans her head against the window, thinking about how all this started. Hey there, friends, and welcome to another episode of Reading Rule Y'all, where we talk about all things rural YA literature and the writers who write it. It's a disappointingly warm October day here. I just got back from my 2-mile walk with Diggity and Attica, my 2 dogs, and it's just a little too warm for my liking. I am so ready for fall weather and highs in the 60s instead of lows in the 60s. And hopefully, since we're now at the beginning of spooky season, those days will be here soon. I've actually decorated this year. I have an autumn wreath on the door and a lantern on the top tier of my nesting flowers stand by the door. I've got 2 small straw bales nestled between a pot of red mums and a pot of yellow mums, and it's the most decorating I've ever done. And I think it's because I'm just inspired by, once again, living in a place that actually has a fall. There's not really an autumn in Texas. The trees aren't as tall. The leaves don't change in the same way. It's just not the same. So since autumn is upon us and the trees are starting to turn to the bright yellows and oranges and reds and everything is gorgeous, I was just a little inspired to decorate this year. So I did, and I can see it from my office window, and I'm just really loving it. So hopefully we'll see some cooler temperatures here soon. And so to usher in this beautiful and spooky season, this month's episodes will feature the Whippoorwill Award winning book Angel Falls by Julia Rust and David Surface. As usual, this episode will sort of be the book talk where I give a summary. I talk about how place is important to the text, the way that it functions in the text through a sort of little mini analysis. I'll talk about some teaching possibilities for the text. And then the next episode will be my chat with the authors, which I was so excited to do because it's the first time we've ever had more than one author. Like, we had a collaborative team of authors on the podcast, and so it was fun to talk about how that makes writing fun and different and challenging and good. So make sure that you stay tuned for that. Before we get into the book talk episode today, I wanted to hit you with some reminders and some announcements. Being as it's October 1st, I wanted to remind y'all that Literacy in Place has the Rural Teen Writing Contest, which is still open and will be accepting submissions until 11:59 Pacific Standard Time on December 1st. It's never too early to start drafting, so get working, y'all rural teens. This year's contest theme is Eat, Dance, and Be Rural, celebrating diverse rural cultures. So send us your memoirs, your poetry, your short stories, your flash fiction, your essays. We will joyfully take it all because we need more rural people telling their rural stories. So make sure you get on that. If you're not a rural teen, but you know one, make sure that you tell them about the contest. The first and second place winners will take home some really great prizes, so be sure to check out the literacyinplace.com website for more details on that, and I'll be sure to put the link to the contest page in the show notes and the description of this video on YouTube. Get writing, rural teen writers. If you want to listen to me chat with some other folks on other podcasts, be sure to check out the latest episode of The Rural Voice, which is the podcast of the National Rural Education Association, or the NREA, where I joined Dr. Erica Bass to talk about YA literature and the Whippoorwill Award for Rural YA Literature. She's on the committee with me, and we have a chat on that podcast, and it was a fun conversation. So if you want to know more about the Whippoorwill Award or about the mission of the National Rural Education Association, make sure you check out that podcast. I was also on the latest episode of Read Appalachia, which is like my favorite podcast, and I still can't believe I got to be a guest on my favorite podcast. And there I talk with the fabulous Kendra Winchester about rural YA literature. And then she's later joined by my friend and the incomparable Nora Shalloway Carpenter, who has an amazing book out set in rural West Virginia that sort of takes on the tensions that exist for rural people that live in resource extraction communities. So it's got a really interesting take on rural environmentalism and how people in rural places, especially extraction communities, I think, which is pretty much every rural place. I don't want to say that 100%, but like most rural places have resources that people have exploited. So anyway, I'm reading that right now, and it is so good. You don't want to miss out on that. And she talks about some really important things. So you don't want to miss it. Make sure you check out that episode and really every episode, because Read Appalachia is such a great podcast. I'll put the links to those episodes in the description for this video and the show notes as well. So make sure you check those out. Not only is it spooky season, but it's also harvest time. And what better way to celebrate than to grab a Reading Rural Y'all or a Literacy in Place sticker for the rural people in your life. Check out our TeePublic store to shop our designs, which you can get on just about pretty much anything you'd want. Tumblers, coffee mugs, tote bags, stickers, magnets, onesies, t-shirts. It really runs the gamut. So make sure that you check out our storefront and represent rural YA literature and the importance of reading it. You can also support us by liking, following, and engaging with us on social media. You can find me at Reading Rural on Twitter or X or whatever it's called now. It's always going to be Twitter to me.
and at Literacy in Place on both Facebook and Instagram. There are lots of opportunities to chime in and tell us about the rural books you've read and loved, suggest ones that I should add to my Literacy in Place book list, etc. So come on in and join us in our rural bookish community. And I think that's it as far as announcements go. So let's get into the rest of the episode. Angel Falls by Julia Rust and David Service is one of this year's Whippoorwill Book Award winners. It's a preternatural powerhouse. Thank you, G.R. Thompson and Dr. G.R. Thompson for teaching me that word at Purdue University. It's a preternatural powerhouse that would be a perfect piece to study alongside Edgar Allan Poe and any other spooky stories you have lined up for spooky season. So here's the summary. Angel Falls is a dual perspective book that follows the lives and stories of Jesse and Jared as they spend the summer in the seaport village of Beauport. Both work in different ways and for different reasons to keep their parents together. Jesse's feel precariously on the edge of divorce, and Jared's dad battles his depression after the loss of his mother. After stumbling on each other, they also find and explore a hidden part of Beauport that holds secrets and a secret power, Angel Falls. They are confronted then with the question, what if you had the power to heal your broken family, to bring back a lost loved one? Would you do it? And what would be the repercussions if you did? Christopher Barzak, Whippoorwill Award-winning author of The Gone Away Place, called Angel Falls, quote, a novel of exquisite mysteries, tender magic, and family secrets, and I couldn't agree more. It is one of the most unique and original stories I've read in a while, so if you're looking for something that just hits a little bit different, this is your book. It's so good. And one of the reasons why I love this book so much is that place is really at the center of this book. I mean, place is the reason why the authors decided to write this book. And we talk more about that in the interview episode. So make sure you stay tuned to find that when it comes out. The idea for this story was born after the authors went hiking in a spooky spot, which, like I said, we talk more about that in the author talk. So everything about the story arose out of the place. The place is the novel, and the novel is the place. And actually, as I say that, I've just thought of something that never quite surfaced before. In my scholarship, I use Doreen Massey's work. She's a critical humanistic geographer. And I use her work to define what I mean when I say place, because a lot of people just think about latitude and longitude. They think about this like space, like on the surface of the planet. You know, it's like this, it's mostly just the way that geographers think about place and the sort of pin that you drop on Google, right? Like that would be the place. That would be place. But that's not exactly what place is. And I'm just realizing that this book builds its rural world in precisely the way that Doreen Massey describes the way that place is built in like the real world. So it's this like thrown together group of interactions and negotiations between humans and other humans, humans and non-human objects, geography, topography, and time. And as I'm speaking this, I'm realizing that this would make for a really interesting framework for how to analyze and understand the way that writers build place in their texts, and that the process that they use to build worlds and to build place in their stories is also the way that place is built in our real lives. Wow. So that's super nerdy, but it's something that this book and my, writing and thinking about this episode and just talking about it here in this episode, has really brought to mind, which is why people should host podcasts and talk to themselves out loud. I'm a total verbal processor, and speaking about these things has really brought that idea to the forefront of my mind in a way that I hadn't considered until I started thinking about the way that place functioned in the writing of this text. So thank you Angel Falls and Julia and David for sparking that idea in me. I'm really excited to pursue that further in my scholarship and maybe as a way to think about how to do my mini analyses for this podcast. But back to my analysis and function of place in this book. What I particularly appreciated about this book is the way that the dual perspective allows for a couple of really important things to happen. One of those things is that there's an examination of what it means to be from a place and how that is similar to but different from being from a people. So you can be from a place and a people, the people of that place. But you can also not be from a place but still be from the people of that place, if that makes sense. So Jessie has been growing up in New York City because her family is a family of out-migrants. Her dad grew up in Beauport but left Beauport for the city. So she's been growing up in New York City, but she's not from the people of New York City. She's from the people of Beauport. And so when she goes to Beauport with her dad, she starts to sort of learn about herself through the lens of Beauport because she's from the people that are from there. So I think that's a really important nuance to think about when it comes to what it means to be from somewhere, because you're also from somebody, some bodies, really. So anyway, I think this book does that really well. And then sort of in connection with that, there's this invitation to think about how in migration and out migration and the crossing of boundaries, whether those are place, language, culture, geospatial, the sort of arbitrary borders and boundaries that geographers draw on maps. I guess cartographers draw on maps. But how those boundary crossings shape how characters build their identity and also how people build their identities even outside of books, and the way that those impact how we read books, how we read what's happening in the world of the book and the world around us outside of the book. So there are tons of other important themes present in this book, how our decisions shape the lives and experiences of the people around us. Reality versus perception, like is perception reality, or does reality lie in some kind of like capital R reality with some capital T truth that exists outside of perception, or like what is that? What does that mean for us as people? What does that look like in our lives? And so much more. All of these are tied to the history of Beauport and Jessie and Jared's experiences of it. And so I think that really brings time to the forefront. A lot of times we don't think about places as being affected by time, but obviously they totally are. And places aren't static. They're constantly in flux. People are constantly coming and going. Buildings are erected, then destroyed, or they sort of, wear away by the ravages of time, I guess. So places change, they're not static. And I think this book really brings that to the forefront too, and offers really important and interesting opportunities to think about the way that places have changed around us in ways that maybe have gone unnoticed because we're always in those places, or how we've noticed places that we're from but left and returned to, how they have changed in our absence and how we've changed in our absence. So those are some really interesting and important things. One of those, all of this I feel like is described by a conversation that Jessie and Jared are having upon their first meeting in Angel Falls. Jared says something disparaging about tourists in Beauport. And that's another thing that I think is really important about this book. Like rural tourism, agritourism. Even now, if you just think about the amount of like pumpkin patches and farms and orchards that are opening their doors to folks to come in and either pick their own or sort of see a limited working of the farm. Agritourism is important for rural economies, and Beauport is no stranger to that. It's a very integral part of this book. So Jared is saying something disparaging about the tourists that Beauport gets from New York City, which is where Jessie is from. And so she sort of takes offense to that, but she poses this thought and she says, maybe I'm not a tourist. Maybe I'm a long lost returnee to Beauport. How would you know? And he cracks a joke about her being a Martian, being an alien. And then they go back to talking about the cemeteries at the falls and the history of the town and Jared's experiences growing up there. So these interactions between the two of them, because of where they're from and who they're from, open up really important spaces for students to consider how perception is connected to the way that history is told and how identity is built by and outsiders of rural communities. And it's just so well done, y'all. Like, it really is. And I would highly recommend this book to rural readers, to non-rural readers, and to readers who enjoy a sort of spooky book during a spooky season. So in the last part of this podcast, especially the book talk episodes, I always think about how I would approach teaching the books that I talk about in my classroom, because that's really my goal, is that I want teachers to invite their rural readers and non-rural readers to read good rural books that depict and illustrate complex and nuanced understandings of who rural people are and what their lived experiences are like. So this season always gets me thinking about the spooky unit that I would do with my students every October, where they would choose their own spooky books and they would do a reading project that asks them to hit some major standards in terms of like theme identification, character development, setting in place, those kind of things. I would cut out puzzle pieces of poster board, and then they would put their puzzle pieces together in a big display in the school. And they did like a comic strip plot summary. And anyway, they had a lot of fun doing those. I think I had a lot of fun grading them and seeing them, but they would get to pick their own books, and they would pick a spooky genre, and then they would apply their learning and understanding of the craft of their books. They would apply that to the writing of their own spooky stories. So it was like a reading writing unit all in one. And then once they finished writing their stories, which were always so creative and fun and just really good, I would always put those stories in the school library where other students could read them, so students had an authentic audience for their writing. And it seemed to me, and maybe they were just lying for my benefit, I don't know, but it seemed to me that students always seemed to enjoy this unit. And like I said, their stories were always so interesting and inventive and creative and fun, and sometimes really, really dark. But it was engaging them in the craft of writing. And so if you're interested in learning more about this unit, or you want to try it out for yourself, I've actually written it up, and you can find it over at Rethink ELA. The link is in the show notes. And this would be a perfect book and unit to pair with readings of Poe's Fall of the House of Usher. I was thinking about that story in particular in terms of like if I were to pair this with like a more canonical, like classical text, I think that's the one that I would choose, because the place of the story, the building of the House of Usher, shapes the experiences of the characters and readers in ways that are sort of similar to what's going on in Angel Falls. So all of that to say that this book is seriously good, and I would totally include it in my spooky unit, in my rural classroom and a non-rural classroom. It's so good, and it's one of those stories that I wish I could put in the hands of, my students in my former rural classroom. So I hope that you will check it out and get you a copy. If you're interested in teaching Angel Falls, you can also find more helpful resources on the project website that Julia and David created. There's a link for that in the video description and show notes. David even put together a reading guide that you can also find linked in the show notes. So there are lots of resources out there if you're interested in including Angel Falls in your teaching. And if your rural teen readers read this book, let us know. We'd love to know what they think about it, if they liked it, what they liked about it, what they didn't like about it. Like, we just really like to know how they were engaging with it. So let us know. Well, that's it for this time. I hope you'll pick up a copy of Angel Falls. If you do decide to get one, it'd be great if you could use the bookshop.org affiliate link available in the show notes. That would give us a little bit of some support for the show. Keep an eye out for the next episode where Julia, David, and I will talk about what defines a rural story, what it's like to co-write, and so much more. Until then, y'all come back now, would you?